And happy to say Jonathan Wilson is with us with a cold. Jonathan, with a cold. Who doesn't have a cold?
Yeah, I do have a cold. It's a really grim cold. So I should have been. I should have been in celebratory mood yesterday with Sunderland's victory over Newcastle, but I was sort of just sitting shivering on the sofa, feeling sorry for myself. Although I would have felt a lot more sorry for myself if Nick Valdemar hadn't given me that gift.
Well, indeed. Listen, your cold has come. 10 days later, it would be no fun. So I guess good to get it out of the way. For listeners, Jonathan already has managed to get a framed 6 by 3 of the photo on his wall. So uh, wanted to talk to you about AFCON if we could, because
Uh,
you wrote a fantastic piece last weekend. It's a tournament which you have covered for a long time now.
mhm.
Um, the headline kind of details for people who I'm sure obviously are very aware at this stage of AFCON, but it's been running since 1957. Only three teams in the 1957 edition. For extra Wilson bonus points, would you like to tell me the three in 1957?
Ethiopia, Egypt, Sudan, and South Africa were forced to withdraw because they wouldn't field a mixed race team.
Never in doubt. They've expanded to 24 teams for the last three editions and now this one. Egypt, most successful nation in the Cup's history. They've won it 7 times to Cameroon's 5, and Egypt won it in '06, '08, and 10. And Ivory Coast are the current champions. They beat Nigeria 2-1 in the 2023 final. And so here we are for the 2025 edition. Um, here's a line. Here's a line from your piece, which we can jump off on. The disdain for Africa is palpable when it comes to this tournament.
Yeah, and it's disgraceful. I mean, there's no other word for it. So I understand European clubs are frustrated and annoyed that they lose players in the middle of the season to the tournament. But David Moyes on Saturday talked about this and said, when you sign an African player, you know that you accept that. It's good that they want to play for their country. I hope we do really well. I wish them all the best, and I hope we come back in good shape. And that is the right attitude to have. Uh, Nobody's pulled the wool over anybody's eyes. You know that when you sign an African player, that they will go to the Cup of Nations. Why is it in the middle of the season? Well, they've done everything they possibly could to help out European clubs by moving it to the European summer. The problem is, if you host it in June, July, that is the West African rainy season. So the last tournament in Ivory Coast was initially scheduled for June, and then somebody at CAF belatedly went, "Oh, hang on, look at the rainfall stats. There is no way pitchers can sustain that. We can't have a tournament where you're getting, several inches of rain a day. So we're going to have to move it back to January, February, as it's been since the early 90s. But the traditional slot is January, February. So you think Morocco, which is where it's going to be this year, why can't we host it in Morocco in June, July? At least we can say, right, the North African ones we can have in the European summer, helps everybody out. Well, that's fine until Gianni Infantino and FIFA invent the Club World Cup running over a month. And then suddenly the Cup of Nations is the thing that has at the last minute to change. And so they're scrabbling around looking for a slot in the calendar. And they've ended up, they didn't want to have it in January, February, partly because that clashes with the Champions League. Now the Champions League has been expanded, back from February into the January. But also, FIFA regulations say that clubs only have to release players for one FIFA tournament, one FIFA sanctioned tournament per year. And that next year is obviously the World Cup. So they then have this awkward compromise where, well, if we start on December 21st, we can claim this is a 2025 tournament. And so the clubs still have to release the players. And it suits absolutely nobody. Running over Christmas economically is madness. But this is a position they've got to be in. The complaint you get from people is, why is it every 2 years? It's not an unreasonable point. Every other confederational tournament is every 4 years. And the reason is money. In 1957, when it began, Africa had no guaranteed slot at the World Cup. They got a guaranteed slot from 1970, but it's one slot. So if you want competitive football for your best teams, then you need to have a confederational tournament every 2 years. That's the only way they can generate the revenues. So if FIFA can find some, and there's no there's no lucrative club tournament. Yeah, you have the African Champions League. It's an important tournament. It's a high level tournament. It's taken very seriously. It does not generate anything like the revenue of the UEFA Champions League. So if you want to generate revenue for African football, which it desperately needs, you have to have this tournament every 2 years. Now, maybe with a 48 team World Cup, now we're getting 8 or possibly 9 African qualifiers. Maybe that will begin to change. But up until now, it's been a maximum of 5. There was 6 when South Africa hosted in 2010. So for the vast majority of African nations, so they're getting proper competitive football that will pay the bills more than once every 4 years. You have to have this tournament every 2 years.
Yeah. You do wonder, you'd love to know when Infantino was creating the Club World Cup, if the African Cup of Nations even crossed his mind. You'd love to know how late in the day when they had said this month, June, July, well, and someone at the back said, "Oh, the AFCON's on then." You'd love to know when that moment happened. I suspect late.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's not forget Gianni feels African, so he. I'm sure it was forefront of his mind. Of course, the CONCACAF Gold Cup was happening at the same time as the Club World Cup, but nobody seemed to notice that. But yeah, I mean, I guess you could have tried to work some awkward fiddle where the Club World Cup is June and the Cup of Nations is July. But then you'd have players playing for Raja Casablanca or whatever, who playing in the Club World Cup going straight to a Cup of Nations. And that makes no sense. I mean, if CAF do not want this, CAF do not want this tournament in the January of a World Cup year because they know this is how it used to be till 2012, and they know that those countries who are going to the World Cup are to an extent experimenting before the World Cup.
Yeah.
They're trying things out. Their focus is the World Cup, understandably, and what they want is everybody desperately trying to win the tournament because that's what produced the best football. So that's why they moved to odd numbered years. But FIFA, and it's nobody but FIFA, has scuppered them.
Mm. Yeah. Um, it does seem, based on everything, like you've said, from what you've said, like moving to every 4 years is probably medium to long term the way to go. The point about economics notwithstanding, that's probably a big point.
Yeah, it probably is. And I guess what you can do is maybe in a World Cup year, they could they or in the intervening year, in that 2 years after the Cup of Nations, they could maybe work out some sort of tournament for teams who aren't involved in the Club World Cup.
Mm.
But it's an awkward compromise. I'm not really sure they should have to make it. When Issa Hayatu was the president, he took a really tough line on this, and he said, this is the price of colonialism. This is this is the only way we can balance the books because of the mess that was left. Now, I'm not sure that's necessarily true, but it's a pretty powerful point, and I admired his resilience in defending the rights of African football. Patrice Motsepe, I there started to be a little bit of friction with Infantino, and of course we now got this issue that Infantino is obviously very close to Trump. Trump wants to kick South Africa out of the G20. Motsepe is a South African. So there is a little bit of friction around that. But I was really interested if Motsepe turned up at the World Cup draw, but he did and fulfilled his duties very diplomatically. Um, but he's not as tough as Hayatu. Um, and the only thing you would say is Africa is, in terms of Infantino getting re-elected, he needs African votes. And that was true of Blatter, was true of Havelange as well. That Africa's been their real bedrock. There is a slight danger that they lose that, or he loses that. But it just sort of feels like Africa gets shunted to the sidelines. You saw this with Infantino's great plan, when he was sort of trying to give something back to Africa. He and Motsepe are there saying, right, we're going to have the African Super League, and it starts out. I think the initial plan was 20 clubs, then it went to 24. And the idea was basically one league, a Super League, the franchises effectively. And then as soon as anybody probed on the details, okay, 20 teams from across the whole of Africa, 55 countries in CAF. So 35 of them are left out to start with, assuming you go one per country. But what sustained African football over the last 60, 70 years? It's the rivalry between, for instance, Kaiser Chiefs and Orlando Pirates, between Zamalek and Al Ahly in Cairo, between Wydad and Raja Casablanca. And you'd have to pick one of those. unless you're going to say, right, we'll have 2 franchises in Egypt, 2 franchises in Morocco, 2 in South Africa, which then means you're ending up with even fewer countries represented. And that tournament, yeah, I mean, where the money he was talking about $100 million tournament, where that money was going to come from was never, or we can speculate, but it was never clear.
Mm.
And it ends up being a 16 tournament in 2023, and now it's not even mentioned on CAF's website. So presumably it's been abandoned, but there's been no official announcement of that.
Yeah. You charted in your piece, it was quite striking to see it. The volatility around just the logistics of this tournament, that not since 2012 has it happened at the intended time and venue, and not always through CAF's fault by any means, albeit, you know, as you've said, the rainy season, West Africa, this time around, it had to move from June and July as was planned for this year. But if you go back, 2013 switch from Libya to South Africa because of the civil war. 2015, Morocco withdrew from hosting over Ebola fears. 2017, there was turmoil in Libya. 2019, moved from Cameroon to Egypt because of construction delays. There was COVID then delays. We won't put that at anyone's door, but COVID was another factor in 21. And then 23, the rainy season one came again. So that is extraordinary, isn't it? That not since 2012 it's happened at the intended date and time.
Yeah, so I mean, CAF, I think it was last month, maybe the month before, they opened the bidding process for the next 4 Cups of Nations. So 2027 we know is in East Africa, in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania. I think it's those 3. Uh, but for the 4 after that, so 29, 31, 33, 35, and you're thinking, yeah, good luck with that. Why are we planning ahead to 2035? I mean, I think I remember in the back of my mind that I think Guinea was supposed to be hosting in 2025, but that was, yeah, got rid of that for some reason, and Morocco stepped in. And Morocco really should have hosted in 2015, but they got very worked up about the Ebola outbreak, which was in, I think I might say Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. I might be wrong about the third country, but Guinea were the big problem because they had qualified and they didn't want fans coming from Guinea. And Equatorial Guinea stepped in. Um, and yeah, we've seen this problem with the AFCON, with the women's tournament, that they're now 2 tournaments into a 3 tournament run of it, them being hosted in Morocco. We've seen that in Asian football, that now a huge amount is hosted in Qatar, particularly, but the Gulf. So I hope they maintain the policy of trying to spread it around Africa. I do fear that Morocco, given all the advantages of wealth and infrastructure they have, I mean, this will be my 12th Cup of Nations, and Morocco obviously has a very well developed tourist infrastructure. So you can just go on a website and book a hotel, which sounds easy. And in Abidjan, fair enough, you can do that. But you can't do that in the other Ivorian cities. And if you want to get from Abidjan to Yamoussoukro or Bouaké or San Pedro or um, Kohogo, yeah, you're having to hire a driver. And you can't travel at night because it's too dangerous. Whereas this tournament, oh look, there's you can go to 4 games in 4 days in the last 16. Oh, here's a train takes 2 hours. Here's a train takes 3 hours. Here's a train takes another 2 hours. I can book all that on the website in advance. It's a totally different experience, but they're both valuable, and hopefully African football can find a way of accommodating both. But I do fear that we'll see, in the same way it was hosted by oil states repeatedly in the last decade. I fear it might be in the sort of wealthier North African states
Yeah,
in the decade going forward.
yeah. Well, Morocco are favourites according to the odds makers, followed by Egypt and then Algeria. You've covered, as you said, 12 of these now. Uh, was there like distinctive style to, and even it's even actually a mad question to ask about a place the size of Africa. But when you go and watch AFCON, was there a distinctive style of football, maybe owing to the heat or the pitches or any other number of factors? And I wonder in 2025, just given the world and how homogenized everything is, and kind of including football tactics, has that dwindled? Is an AFCON less different than it might have been to Euros a decade or 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think it probably is less different. I mean, you're right to be cautious about suggesting there's a homogenous style. I think there's always been a difference between the North African game and the West African game, and then obviously differences within them. But there remains, uh, I think, a huge difference between North African football and West African football. and no West African team has ever won a tournament in North Africa.
Yeah.
Egypt won in Ghana in 2008. I think they were the first North African to win in West Africa. So that's why I think the teams you list as favourites, the three favourites, are all North African
And
in the North.
what is the difference between North and West?
So pitch quality is better in North Africa. It's not as hot because it's you're playing in January, February. I mean, Egypt actually in 2006 was properly cold. 2019 they played that in our summer, so that was a lot warmer. The humidity obviously is much stronger in West Africa. Pitches in West Africa tend to be worse. I mean, that's slightly unfair, I think, on Ivory Coast where the pitches were generally pretty good. Cameroon, the pitch in Yaoundé was pretty good, but they had to move a game from Douala, I think, which was the sort of the second biggest stadium because the pitches were so poor. Gabon and Equatorial Guinea had essentially just built new stadiums for the tournament and had very new pitches that were very bobbly. I mean, Mali in 2002, the pitches were atrocious.
Right.
And what that leads to is you can't really pass the ball, so you end up whacking it forward a bit quicker and it becomes a bit more direct. A lot more long range shots. Tends to be a lot fewer goals. I mean, you look at finals. There's a whole load of, I think, of 11 finals I've been to, have six finished 0-0 and gone to penalties. I think that's true. It might be five. But yeah, there's not many goals in those West African ones particularly.
Mm.
So there is definitely a difference of approach. But I think it's also just sort of culturally, it's very different. In the same way we've seen in the World Cup, it's very difficult for European teams to win outside of Europe. Very difficult for South American teams to win in Europe. It's a it's a not dissimilar process, and probably as travel and transport and things get homogenized, that's becoming less and less of an issue. But yeah, definitely. I mean, the football should be good in this tournament because the pitches should be good and the temperature should be sort of high teens. So it should be pretty pleasant to play in. So all of that looks good. I think if you're looking at a non-North African team, Senegal have got to be the favourites. Just incredible goal scoring midfield. Habib Diarra from Sunderland should be fit. He wasn't fit enough for the derby, but he is joining up with the Senegal squad, and obviously they've still got Mane. Ivory Coast, the holders. I mean, it's slightly freakish the way they won it 2 years ago. That they lost two games in the group stage, replaced their manager, and MS Faye came in, but they've been really good since then. But yeah, I think Morocco on home soil justifiably are favourites.
Okay.